Hi guys, so today we're going to talk about energy, enzymes, and biological reactions. The concepts that we're going to be discussing this week are essentially energy and chemical reactions. We're going to overlook and see or do an overview of what metabolism is. We'll be discussing what enzymes essentially are and this small thing called a ribozyme. We're going to talk about how reactions are inhibited, and then we're going to do an overview of metabolism again. So, the energy of life. Well, essentially, we know that living things are these miniature chemical factories. And essentially, we have thousands of reactions happening. And if you remember what reactions are, it's this thing where we start with molecules called reactants, right? And then something's going to happen that's going to lead to these things we make called products, right? And so this whole overall process is essentially what are known as reactions. So in order for these to happen and for the cell to function, the cell has to extract energy from molecules and apply that energy to allow a thing called work to be performed. So work is just anything that the cell is going to do. Now, some organisms convert energy to light. This process is called bioluminescence. So you can see I took a trip one time down to Puerto Rico, and you could actually see this in the water. And there's supposed to be a couple lakes like that here in Texas. I haven't located them yet, but essentially you could go through on these glass bottom kayaks. And as you were going through this lake that's off of the ocean, well, it's kind of these waterways that go, and then it leads to this lake. And so you essentially start on the coast of Puerto Rico in the ocean, and then you go through these waterways. And as you get farther and farther and closer to this lake, you'll look into the water, and it's this amazing sight where it looks like all these little kind of twinkling is happening in the water. And essentially what's happening, and if you ever get a chance to go see it, it's one of the most magnificent things I've seen, is essentially as your paddles were entering and hitting into the water, essentially the bacteria that was living in the water would do this kind of reaction. And so the more you went through the water and the more you hit, the more you kind of moved the water, the more that this twinkling would happen. And it was pretty cool. And so the twinkling essentially was a reaction that allowed them to bioluminesce or take certain energy to light, and it was a protective measure for the bacteria. Now, life wouldn't evolve without things called catalysts, and basically most of which are proteins. And these proteins are called enzymes, and catalysts are these things you'll find out that help to speed up reactions. So enzymes are known to speed up reactions, or the rate of reactions, sometimes by millions of times, without the need to increase temperature. So at any point, essentially, when you're talking about reactions, you can't control your temperature. Your temperature is controlled by a part of your brain that you don't think of. It's called the hypothalamus. So if you want some reactions to essentially go faster, you don't look at your thigh when you want to run and go, okay, thigh, make my reactions go faster. Go faster, thigh, go faster. No, they just happen. And essentially, you can't sit there and make them happen faster by looking at your thigh and go, please heat up. Now, the chemical plants in the area, a lot of what they do, they increase the heat, and that causes reactions to happen faster. But because our entire body is a certain temperature, that doesn't happen. So that's why we have enzymes. And enzymes are important in what's known as metabolism. And metabolism is not what we think metabolism is. Essentially, we look at metabolism and we think, hey, we eat something and it's the breakdown of food, which is more complicated than that. It is the sum of all the reactions in the body. So let's talk about chemical and what chemical and energy is. And my question to you would be, what is energy?
What is energy?
Energy is the ability to do work, the ability to cause motion and change. To understand the fundamental facts of energy, you must have a working knowledge of its terminology. From atoms down to X-rays, sing along and learn with me the ABCs and XYZs of energy.
What kinds of energy are there?
There's nuclear, mechanical, and solar energy, and electrical, and chemical, and radiant, and heat. There's light and there's magnetic, and that's quite enough for me, 'cause that makes 9 different kinds of energy. With the discovery of atomic energy, scientists have found that matter can be changed into energy, and energy can be changed into matter. But even though matter and energy may change their forms, the total amount in the universe remains the same. The law of conservation, speaking universally, says you can't increase or decrease the amount of energy. Though energy may change its form and does it constantly, you can't increase or decrease the quantity. Though energy may change its form and does it constantly, you can't increase or decrease the quantity.
So yes, I absolutely love this song. I know, look, it's from 1950, right? But it makes some really good points in what energy is. And so its ability to do work. And we're going to actually talk about what work is. Now, the whole field in biology that deals with this is what's called bioenergetics. And that's basically my specialty. I went to graduate school and studied mitochondria for a good 4+ years doing that. It took me about 5.5 years to get my degree. And so essentially that's the study of how organisms manage their energy source. And over the next 3 weeks, we'll be talking about this overall concept of bioenergetics. And we'll be talking about the process of our body making energy or translating it from a really big amount to smaller amounts that it can use using cellular respiration. And then essentially how plants make molecules that they can take energy from through photosynthesis. So, energy, life, and the laws of thermodynamics. So, to understand biology requires knowing a little bit of physics and chemistry. The first part of this class is essentially all about biochemistry and molecular biology and those processes in biological organisms that we don't necessarily see. So, the foundation is always in a little bit of physics and essentially chemistry. So the law of thermodynamics essentially deals with energy, and energy is the capacity to cause change. This is defined as the capacity to do work. So work essentially is change. So it's the idea of just having something that can change the situation. So energy exists in many different forms. You have heat energy. Essentially, you can find that with temperature. You have chemical energy, which we can talk are things that are associated with chemical reactions. We have electrical energy, mechanical, and radiant energy. And radiant energy includes things like light energy, gamma rays, and X-rays. And so essentially, and if you notice with, they talked about nuclear energy, and that's how you could tell that that thing was from the 50s, because essentially it was not long before that that they did experimentation in looking at nuclear energy, aka think the nuclear bomb in World War II. So energy does exist in many different forms. And what's really cool about energy is that when you use energy, it doesn't just go away. When you use energy, essentially what you're doing is you're converting it from one form to the other. So when we're looking at it, for instance, in plants, when we're talking about photosynthesis, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, radiant energy is sunlight. And so when you have sun coming down, right, essentially that when you have this nice plant that's here, This plant is going to take up that radiant energy and they're going to transform it into chemical energy because essentially they're going to make sugar. So the energy that's in the sunlight is being converted and put into bonds to make the sugar. So you don't all of a sudden just use the light energy and it goes away. It just gets converted into something else. Now, the main two types of energy we're going to be talking about, because all this energy can be classified into what's called kinetic or potential energy.
The rolling boulder crashing down the mountain, that's kinetic energy.
Kinetic.
The boulder sitting high upon the mountain, that's potential energy.
Potential.
Energy in motion is kinetic. Energy that's waiting is potential. But whether it's kinetic or potential, both of them are energy.
Olay.
You stretch a rubber band and then release it. That's kinetic energy.
Kinetic.
You stretch a rubber band and then you hold it. That's potential energy.
Potential.
Energy in motion is kinetic. Energy that's waiting is potential. But whether it's kinetic or potential, both of them are energy.
Olay. So, sorry, I love all kinds of music, so whenever I can find something that essentially explains it using music, I'm going to be there. So, essentially what we're looking at here, guys, is that energy, like we said, is the ability to promote change or do work. So the two main forms is either kinetic or potential. So kinetic has to do with movement. So I always remember here, especially once the Xbox came out with the Kinects, it's called Kinects because when you play it, you move. So all energy that's associated with movement is essentially kinetic energy. So they gave examples, a falling rock or a boulder, right, is kinetic energy. Or they were talking about when you sling a rubber band across, that is kinetic energy. Electricity, because it's moving. Or thermal energy, heat and light, all of this is essentially classified as kinetic energy because it has movement. Now, potential energy is due to structure and location. So this is a way that we store energy. So before the rock is actually falling down the hill or mountain, it's at the top. So at the top, it's just waiting. And then essentially because it hasn't moved yet or done anything, it has potential. It hasn't been used. Chemical energy that's sitting there in a bond, nothing's happened yet to break it or take it. So that's potential energy. Energy in relationship to gravitational pull or stored mechanical energy. So my idea with potential, if I go and say, man, this student has amazing potential to go anywhere they want to go and to be a really, really smart and good student. Does that mean that they're a good student at the moment? No, they haven't done anything to show that they are. But you can look at them and just see that they have it within them. So that's what I think about potential energy. Nothing's happened yet. They have potential to be a good student. Well, they're not essentially a good student right now, but they have everything within them to make them that way. Where if they were and they were actually doing it, that would be kinetic energy, right? And so this section is going to focus a lot on chemical energy, and this is the energy in molecular bonds. This is a form of potential energy. And so we're looking at this and we're going to be focusing on this in the next couple weeks. Now watch this video, and as you go through, before they tell you if it is potential or kinetic energy, see if you can figure it out. So the idea that when that mousetrap was open, in just the process of it waiting and being open, that was potential energy because nothing had happened. Once that mouse triggered it and it started moving to clamp onto it, that's when it converted to kinetic energy. I love cartoons. So when we were looking at the coyote, essentially when he pushed that spring back, once the spring is pushed back and it's just holding, it's not acting on or doing any change. So that was essentially potential. Once it pushed Coyote and he started moving, the energy went from it hadn't done anything to doing something, so the movement was kinetic. And then of course, when he was not falling yet and he was just holding there in basically in space, it was potential. Once gravity started working on him, pulling him down towards the earth, it turned to kinetic. So this just proves that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's interconvertible, right? And so kinetic energy, when this batter is just sitting there with the bat, right? They have their little arms and essentially they have the bat and they're not swinging it yet. That's what's potential. Once she swung it and she hits this ball to move it, that's kinetic energy. It's the same idea with this archer here. Do you see how she's holding it back? That's potential energy. Now, once she releases it and it moves forward and this arrow starts moving, then it goes into potential energy. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just transferred or it's interconvertible. And then essentially that is what's considered the first law of thermodynamics. So I'm going to stop right now, and then we're going to talk in this next video about the first and second law of thermodynamics, and then the rest of it we'll talk about at a later time in later discussions.